just, a quick show of hands, how many people are using Azure DevOps? You can put it in the chat, you can come live and say me, you can do whatever you like.
Me, a little bit.
Me, a little bit. Nice, that's one person.
I'm using just Azure, but not Azure DevOps, so everything's going to be new for me here.
Awesome, okay. Okay, so Azure, this is really focused. We can do other ones on Azure DevOps, obviously, but Azure DevOps is made up of a handful of tools, Azure Boards, Azure Repos, Azure Pipelines, Azure Test Plans, and Artifacts. What we decided to do tonight was just do one on Azure Test Plans. Let's just pick one and do it, but, happy to do demos on and other nights on anything else. But let me give you a little tour of Azure Test Plans and how they work. So if you're an Agile team, so if you're not an Agile team, and a lot of people aren't yet, surprisingly, but still they're not, and they're still writing test plans and executing manual tests because they don't have automated tests for their code. Maybe it's an older legacy app that's really difficult, it's not testable, and it's difficult to write unit tests for. So they still have manual tests. And what Azure Test Plans is, that's exactly what it's for. It's for executing manual tests against an application. And even if you are an Agile team and your build and release cycle, whether it's in GitHub Actions or Azure Pipelines or Jenkins or TeamCity or whatever, if you're running your automated unit tests and your integration tests with the release, that's all good. But there's likely still going to be stuff that you need to test manually. There's still going to be things, whether it's usability testing or there's going to be always test cases that you need to execute at the end of the sprint or during the sprint as the story gets finished, just to make sure that all is good. And that's the kind of thing that I'm going to talk about a little bit tonight. So I've got Azure DevOps here. I've got a team, or I've got a product actually called Parts Unlimited. And I've got 3 teams actually, a Toronto team, a London team, and an external vendor that I use. So I'm going to just sort of concentrate on the London team a little bit. And the London team has a backlog of items. And if I go over to my Kanban board, you'll see all the items.
You disappeared, Dave. Are you there? Dave? Can you hear Dave?
Too much wine.
Oh, not enough.
He's going to get more yet.
Now he's just checking his it's probably the internet on his end. Oh, X can hear Dave. I cannot hear Dave.
I can't hear Dave either.
That's okay. We can use that time to take a sip.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Thanks.
Can you guys hear me now?
Still yes.
Yep.
Oh, there we go. I don't know what happened there. My headset must have gone crazy on me. Okay, so we're good. We're back. You can hear me. You can see my screen.
Yep.
Beautiful. Okay. So, so as I was saying, I've got my Kanban board here, and here's the items that we're working on in this sprint. I've got my stuff that's still sitting out in the backlog, things that are being groomed by the product owner, things that have been approved by the product owner, and then everything in my development QA and ready for review is the stuff that's in the sprint, things that we've already finished over on the end there. So one of the things in Azure DevOps, the way you do test plans is you create a test case and then you associate that to the test plan.
and it's really important to associate the test case properly. So if I was to open up a test case, or sorry, a user story, I can attach a test case to it. I'm going to just show you kind of the bulk way, and I'll show you some easier ways. But right here under related work, or over here on the link tab, you can do it as well. There's an add link. And right here, I could say, I want to add a new item. And when I do that, what I want to do is pick up, I need to make sure that I pick the link type tested by and say that I'm creating a test case. The problem with this is you can see there's a lot of different link types. Like there's a lot of ways that we can connect up different work items in Azure DevOps, or other things as well, hyperlinks and commits and check-ins and all kinds of stuff. So if somebody, by accident picked the wrong link, it kind of messes things up a little bit. So what you want to make sure you do is that we want to show that the related work on a story is that, it's got a parent. So right here is my parent. That's the feature that I'm a part of. The children, or how I'm going to build this, my tasks. And then I've got my tested by, and that's my test cases. So you always want to have your test cases in the tested by relationship. So a nice, easy way to do that is that when they're sitting in the backlog, if I just come into here and say, add a test, and I just put in the title, validate, so my story is the user need to be entered a valid user ID into the application for the correct role. Validate login by role. So there's a test case. So I've just gone and created a test case. And later on, when it comes time for the sprint, or closer to when we're doing sprint planning, I can go into the test case itself and I can fill in all the details. So the details in the test case essentially are the steps. So, here I've got my steps. My steps might be something like navigate to the application, enter user ID, enter password. All right, so you get the idea, right? I'm putting in the steps of it. Click on login button, and my expected result is logged in as administrator. And maybe here I had in my enter user ID be Lloyd, and my password was PS word, like that. So that's a test case, right?
Good thing it's recorded, right, Dave?
Yeah. Go ahead, Max.
No, I was gonna say, good thing this thing is recorded, right?
Why?
Password.
Because what?
Your password.
Oh, it's not a real password. Don't worry. So, one of the cool tricks that you can do in a test case in Azure DevOps is that, I'm going to probably have to write this test case for every role, right? I need administrator. If I'm an insurance company, I need underwriters have different rights to somebody else in the organization, right? We have different roles that we fill in. So maybe what I want to do is something like this: go at user ID, and when I hit enter, now if you go down here and just look at what it's doing, let me just scroll down. Let's see if there we go. So see, it added a field here under my parameter values called user ID. And if we go back up here and put in at password, now it's added a password. Now I can put in here, well, if I log in as D. Lloyd and put in the password, and then maybe here I'm going to say, well, you know what? I want a at result. And the result is I log in as admin. And then, of course, I can come down here and add more data points, right? I could log in as Max, and his password is the same. But he's a stakeholder. And then I can have other ones. So now I've got one test case that'll execute multiple times with different data. And that data can stay right here inside the test case, or I can convert it to shared parameters that I can use across multiple test cases. So just a cool little trick that you can use to make, I'm not going to save that, just to make you know, test cases a little more resilient and easier to build out instead of having to have so many different test cases. So you can see here in my backlog, I've got my stories. You can see the tasks that are under it. You can see the test cases or the validation points that are under it, and you can see what I'm going to test. So that really is the easiest place to do that, and you know, for the main reason that you can't mess up the type of relationship that you're attaching it to, so it will end up there done properly. And when you know, I'm going to talk about test plans, and it's important that we hook them up with the right relationship. So let's jump over to the test plan. So let's say I've got my stories. You know, it's early in the sprint. We've decided what stories we're going to do. I've written my test cases that we need to execute. So now I'm going to write a test plan for the sprint. So I come in here. It takes me to the last test plan I was on. So I'm just going to jump back out. So here's all my test plans from all my sprints. I'm going to make actually a new one for sprint 2 just to show you how it works. So I'm going to go sprint 2. I'll call it sprint 2 test plan, and we'll actually associate it with the sprint. It's for the London team. So there's my area path, and we'll create my test plan. So here's my test plan. And within here, now a test plan is just created as a work item as well. So under the covers, this is a work item. But in the UI, you wouldn't know that. And within here, what I need to do is create test suites. So test suites are just a bucket that will hold a bunch of test cases that I can execute. So I'm going to go in and pick my my test suite creator. And there are 3 different kinds. I can have a static test suite, which is really just like a folder. I can have a query-based test suite that goes out and searches for test cases to bring into the test plan. I'll show you an example of that. But the best one is the requirement-based suite. So I'm actually going to pick a requirement-based suite. And what it's going to do is bring up a little query engine that says, okay, well, I'm looking for work item types that are either requirement or bug, that are for the London team, and that are for sprint 2. And if I run that query, so here's everything that we said we would do in sprint 2. So I've got 3 stories here, and I'm just going to pick them and say create suites. So it just brings my stories into the test plan. So now I'm specifically saying that in this test plan, I'm going to test these 3 stories. So they're the only 3 stories in my sprint. They're the 3 that I'm going to test. That's great. You can see my test plan just writes itself, because what it does is it brings the test cases that are attached to the test plan into the test, or that are attached to the story into the test plan for me. So here are my test cases that I've got. Now, I might also want to execute some regression tests from the last couple of sprints, right? So I might be, you know, over time building up tests that I think I should probably execute every sprint. Hopefully, I mean, you can't possibly test everything. Hopefully you're automating that. So, you know, in the next sprint, maybe you're doing some work to automate the tests from the last sprint to alleviate some of this, because there's just not enough time to manually test everything. But if I do have a handful of regression tests, I can use the query-based suite. And this also creates a little query for me. So I'm just going to call it regression. So these are regression tests. And what I'm looking for is test cases that have a tag on them that contain the word regression. And if I run my query, you can see I got a whole bunch of them. So these are all my regression tests. So if I grab these guys and say create a suite, there we go. So now I've got my regression test suite. And if anybody goes out and takes one of my test cases and adds a regression tag to it, it'll automatically show up in this list for me. And then I could do this. Now this is my test plan sprint after sprint after sprint. Those are my 2 steps to write a test plan. 1, bring in the stories from the sprint. 2, add my regression tests, and boom, I've got a test plan. I'm ready to go. So when it comes to executing these, any questions so far? Everybody following? Are you making sense?
Sorry, can you go
So
back
far, so good.
to the regression thing?
Yeah. What do you want me to go back to the regression thing on?
How did you create it?
Oh, okay. So what I did was I went into new suite and I said, I want to create a query-based suite. Right? So if I go, oops, I click on the right thing. So if I go to new suite and go to query-based suite,
By the way,
it lets me write a query.
what's the difference between the suite, plan, and the case?
So this is my test plan right here. Sprint 2 is my test plan. So if I jump out of it, let's go back. So here's all the test plans that I have right now. So I've just created a test plan called Sprint 2. And if I open that up, now I'm in my Sprint 2 test plan, and it has 4 test suites. And a test suite is just a grouping or an organization of test cases that I need to execute. So you can organize things by test suites. And when it comes to reporting, I'll show you a little bit of the reporting and what kinds of things you can do with test suites. Within my test plan, I can then organize this into test suites. Here, I'll create a static one as well. So a static one you'll see is nothing more than just, it's like creating a folder. So this, this could be all my login tests. And then you could make another one for another part of the application. You could make a static suite for all kinds of things. And then within here, within that, I can come in and add test cases. I can either create a new test case or I can add test cases to it. Matter of fact, here's kind of a cool little trick that you can do for adding test cases. And I hesitate to show you this, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But there's a grid. So in the grid, I can put a title and then actions and expected results. And then another title, actions, expected results. And it'll actually create a whole bunch of test cases as I put these in. So it's like, all right, test case 1, step 1, step 2, result. Test case 2, et cetera. And it'll actually create work items or work item test cases for it. But the problem is they're not attached to stories. And you really want your test cases to be attached to stories because you are testing something, right? You want the traceability through the product. One of the great benefits of Azure DevOps over all other products in the market is that even though these things are separate products, even though there's Azure boards and repos and pipelines and test plans are separate products, they're interrelated. They're connected. So I can go into my boards and I can create myself a sprint or a backlog or a team with a backlog and a sprint, and I can add the stories to them. And then I can add test cases to those stories. And as I validate the test cases on those stories, I can see that those test results in my reporting, throughout from right through builds and releases, everything is just interconnected. And when you build it this way, although it's easy and quick, you still need to go back and take the test case and attach it to the story, or at least you should. I'm going to jump out of that so I don't end up creating those. So that's a static test suite. This one is a query-based test suite, right? That's this guy. And that just means that he's based on a query. And my query is, if I open up one of these, my query is to look for any test cases that have a tag on them called regression. So there's my regression tag at the top. So what I do is I can just go, like if I decide down the road, this is no longer a valid regression test because we have an automated test that covers this, so I'm not worried about it. And I do that, and then when I refresh here, that will disappear out of my list, and it won't be one of my regression tests anymore. So it becomes like a living, your test plan is a live document because this query runs and brings in everything that you need to execute sprint after sprint. And these are the stories that are in the current sprint, and all the test cases that are attached to them. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
So let's talk about execution a minute. So
I'm sorry, just people, there was somebody else that I interrupted when I asked the question. Somebody else wanted to ask something.
did somebody have another question? No. Okay. If you do, speak up or throw it in the chat. And I've got the chat open on another window. I can see it. So let's go execute. So there's a few things, by the way, also that you can do. When you go to execute, one of the things that you might want to do is execute in multiple configurations. So here you can see within Azure DevOps, I can define those configurations. So I've got a Chrome, an Edge, a Firefox, and a Safari configuration so that I can test under different browsers. But I could actually come in here and say, I can add new configuration variables. So my configuration variables right now are browser, mobile device, and operating system, but I can add more variables to that. And then within that, I can add multiple configurations. So in here, I could have a complicated configuration that is, Mac with Safari kind of thing. And then I can add configuration variables to it. So I can say, well, I need an operating system and I want the operating system. Of course, I don't have it as one, but I would pick the Mac, the iOS that I want to configure. And then I can say, I also want to be able to do it on a particular browser on that machine. So you can make the configurations quite complicated. So you create the different variable configurations, and then you create the variables within those. And then once you've got a bunch of configurations set up, over in your test plan, I can actually go into a test suite and say assign configurations. So within here, you'll see I've actually got, I'm testing under Chrome and Edge. Well, if I wanted to add Firefox to that, I can add it, and you'll see under my execution, now I've got Edge, Chrome, and Firefox. So my test plan, or even though my user story actually only has a handful of test cases, when I open it up for execute, it multiplies them by the number of configurations that I want to test by. So where's my other one here that I just picked? There's the one that I picked, Firefox. So you see, I've only got 2 test cases, but I need to execute them 6 times because I got to go after 3 different browsers. So I'm going to turn Firefox off again just to simplify things. So I can set up my configurations, and that just once again expands my test plan. Again, it's a living test plan. And when I want to execute these, so there's multiple ways to execute them. So I could just, highlight these guys and say, okay, well, I'm going to do my Edge testing, and then I can open up a browser next to this, right? Like, I can go in and open up another copy of Edge right next to it, and I could go to my application and, wherever the application is, and I could execute my tests. And then, over here, as I'm executing them, I can just say, well, those passed. And you'll see there we go. So now I started updating my test plan. So now I've got some past ones, and maybe I'd go in and try the ones on Chrome, and maybe I ran those and they failed. So we got a problem with Chrome here. So now I've started putting results into my test plan. So if anybody comes and looks at the results of the test plan, they can see that, so far out of all my test cases, I've executed 4 tests, 2 are passing, 2 are failing. Before I show you how to see those results, let me just show you another quick thing. So the other thing that I could do is I could run those tests. So if I say run for a web application, I'll give it a sec here. Oh, interesting. Oh, maybe I need to pick a few of them. Let's go, we'll do the Chrome ones this time. There we go. That's what I wanted. So now, so here's my app on the side that I'm testing. Here's my test runner over here. So I've got a test runner. So it's, open browser, and I can check these off as I do them. Yeah, that worked. I went to the website. I logged in with the username Lloyd. Yep, that worked. I put in the password. That worked. And the result was, and maybe that failed. So I can fail that step and put in a comment. When I logged in, I was stakeholder, not admin. And maybe I want to grab a screenshot of this. So I'll just pick the screen that I want. And we'll just, maybe I just want to show this is what happened, and this is not what I should be seeing because I'm an administrator. And put that back. And so there's my screenshot added into my test runner. There's a video recorder, so I could actually record myself running the tests and then attach that to the test run as well. I can create a bug from here. So, and a bug is just another work item type in Azure DevOps. So here's my bug that I've created. Let's just make this a little bigger. Give it a second to just load up. And here's the cool thing about when the bug loads. So see my steps? The steps to reproduce come from the test case. So you can see the ones, so this is what I did. So you don't have to write the steps to reproduce. And this is the one that failed. And here's the data that I put in from the configuration. And there's the system info of the machine of the test machine that I'm running on. And if you look over here at the related work, there's the test case that I'm executing and the story that I'm testing attached to the bug. So now we know the bug is associated to this, related to this story, because this is the story we were testing at the time. And the tested by means that because it's attached to the bug, when this bug comes around as fixed, I'll know how to validate it because I'm going to execute this test case. That's the integration that you get throughout the system that I never see in another tool. And then here's all the tests that I picked, right? So there's my multiple iterations of data that I talked about. So if I move on to the next test, you can see now I'm logging into someone else, and I'm going to have a different role as a basic role. And then there's step 3 or iteration 3. Here's a whole other test case. So I can use the test runner to run through all my tests. And then that will, of course, report back whether things, see, it shows up as failed. The other ones I never finished, so they're still active. So it's showing up as failed now. Questions about test execution? Make sense? So we write a test case. Here's your basics. We write a test case, attach it to the story. You can execute it by adding it to a test plan and either just marking it as passed or failed, or you can actually use the test runner to execute them the way I just did. To use this tool is very popular when when somebody's writing test cases and handing them off to a team of testers that are going to execute them. So if you've got testers in offshore organizations and you want to write the test cases here, or maybe there, it doesn't matter, but you write the test cases to the application, and then those test cases are put into test plans and available for anybody to execute. Just as a point of that's worth mentioning, to be an author of a test plan, there's a specific license in Azure DevOps that you need. But to execute tests, you can do that with a basic license. You don't need the special license for it. It's much, much cheaper. So just realize that if you do want to use Azure Test Plans, not all your testers have to have the test plan license. Anybody executing tests can just be basic. So I'm going to switch test plans because I want to show you a couple of quick reports that I've already built. No point building them in front of you because that just takes some time, and I'll show you how though. So in my test plan, right, I've got my define, my execute, and then I got a chart. And if I go up to the test plan level, so these charts I created just by going here and say a new test case chart. So, you know, the first one is my test results. So in this test plan, I have 23 tests, 15 which are passing, 6 are failing, and 2 are in progress. By configuration, I've got 17 in Chrome and only 6 in Edge. So that could be something that I'm looking to. Here's actually my test results by configuration. This is just number of test cases. This is test results. Here's test results by tester. You can actually associate or assign tests to be executed by different testers. And here they are by test suites. So there's all my regression tests. Here are the tests for story 1892, 1876, and 1877. So each of these are a story in the sprint. And I can see that how the tests are coming along by story. So to make one of these, let's just jump into one and have a look. So when I come into here, so I've made this, so this guy is a stacked bar, and my axes are, I got different choices, but I picked suite and outcome. Outcome is, of course, test results. If I switch this over from suite to tester, then you'll see it, you know, Dan hasn't executed any tests and I've executed a bunch of tests. I can do it by run type, whether it's automated or manual. So these are all manual so far. I can do it by failure type, and I'll show you that in a minute where you get that kind of stuff. That's from the runs. So, you know, when you come into here, you can either do a test case chart or result chart. And the result chart is the one that lets you do it by outcome. So there's my pie chart by outcome. Here's a bar chart, column. I can have a stacked bar, which gives me another axis. Or I can have a pivot table, which also gives me another axis. So I can do outcome by suite. And actually, if we flip that, let's go suite by outcome. And let's make it so that passed is green and failed is red. So there's my, that's how I would have made my chart by suite. And then when I save these, I can then take these and throw them on a dashboard. So there's a dashboard option to add these to a dashboard. So let's take a quick look at what a dashboard would look like. So I've got a testing dashboard sitting over here. And here's a whole bunch of information about what's going on in QA right now. So I call it my bug tracking dashboard. And it's showing that I have 9 bugs. And these are just tile reports that are based on work item queries. So I've got 9 bugs, 2 of them are critical. 4 of them are more than 60 days old, and I have 1 impediment right now. I can see my bugs by priority, by severity, by configuration, and that's test by configuration. And then I can see these are all test results. So these are the overall test results, so 23 tests, like I said before, 15 passing, 6 failing, 2 that are in progress. Here they are by test suite, by tester, and by configuration. So all that information is just being pulled up out of Azure DevOps into a dashboard for me to see. The last thing I want to show you is test runs. So every time, let's go back to test plans for just a second. So every time I execute tests, so when I come into here and go to execute, so these 2 are showing in progress. So let's say that let's fail them. Let's just say that they both failed. So both of these tests failed. And what happened right then when I did that, whether I use the test runner or this, is I end up with a test run. And test runs, so think of test cases as a bucket of reusable work items that I can execute anytime I want. You know, they don't have associated with them a pass or a fail. They're just a script that I can execute. And then every time I do execute them, I end up with a test run. So here's the test run that I just ran. You can see it's named after the test suite. So which is handy that my test suite is a requirement-based test suite, because now I can see that I was executing this particular, or tests against this particular story. And if I open up this test run, in here it shows 2 tests were executed in this run. Both of them failed. There's the build number that I was running against. I'll show you that. I never showed you that before. I can add comments, so I can update comments to the test run about it. I can add attachments to the test run. Maybe I've got screenshots or other information about my test execution that I want to attach to this. I can go into my test results and I can look at each individual test case. I can update analysis on them. So for it, I can say things like, what was the failure type? Is it a new issue? Is it a known issue? Was it a regression test? Was it unknown? I can put what the resolution is going to be. I can put in a comment about it. And all that gets stored in this test run for me. I can also create a bug from here, just like I did from Test Runner. So here's my bug. And if the test plan that or the test case that I had executed had steps, they would be filled in here as well. So all the same kind of information. You can see it's tested by this test case, so it attaches the bug to the test case for me again. So the test runs are really the results that we're going to report on. So if you have to sign off on something to go to production, this is the information that you're going to get. And the way you roll this all up is with a progress report. So this progress report right here, you'll see it gathers up all the test runs and shows me where we are right now. So it shows me that I've got 23 tests, right? I've got one test plan with 23 test points. Of those 23 test points, 100% of them have been run. 65% pass rate right now, so 15 are passing, 8 are failing. Here it is. Here's a trend report over time, so we can see you'll notice I just failed 2, so it's just dropped down on me in the last short time. I can spread this out over a longer period, 14 days, 30 days, depends on when I started executing tests. Here's my sprint. There's each of my stories, or my test plan. Each of my test suites, how many tests are in each of those, how many of those have been run, the pass rate, the fail rate. I can also, if I want to, I could pull in multiple. I could say, well, let's see what's going on over sprint 1 and sprint 2. Maybe I've got 6 sprints in a release, and I want to gather up all the data from multiple test plans. So I can do that as well. You'll see now it's changed. Now I'm 74% passing. I've got 35 passed, 11 failing, and 1 actually blocked. So all this stuff is just built right in and ready to be used, and ties into everything else so easily. A couple other really quick things. I got another minute or so left. One thing that I showed you in the test run that it would bring the test or the build over with you. And if you go into here, if you go to test plan settings, one of the things that you can do is when you get a new build, you can come in here and say, oh, okay, well, I am now testing this build, and I can save that. So now anytime I execute tests, it'll show that build as the build that went again, that I was testing at the time. So now I'm marking builds to show this one had passing tests, this one had failing tests. And so if I came into here now and said, actually let's just pretend for a second that we just got these, that build came and there was fixes for these and they passed. And now if I go over to my runs, you can see I should have a pass. There we go. So there's a passing run. And as it loads, and there's my new build number right there. So complete integration from user story, even the repos, even though I didn't get into it in the time we had, our builds and releases, test plans. And a matter of fact, if people are checking in code against the work items, which is very, very highly recommended. Matter of fact, I'll show you really, really quickly how easy that kind of thing is. So when you're in a completely integrated system like Azure DevOps, and by the way, Azure DevOps integrates very well with GitHub too. So you could be using GitHub and Azure DevOps together if you wanted to. I think Max mentioned that. But so from the boards, let's see, just look here. Let's say I was going to start working on this story. One of the things that I could do is come in here Come on. There we go. And I can create a new branch. So I can create a branch off the Parts Unlimited master branch, and it's already associated to my story. So whenever I commit this back or do my pull request back into the master branch, that story is going to come with it. And that means that that story is associated to the code that implemented the story or fixed the bug, either way that you do it. And if we go and take a look at, let me just jump into another project and show you really quickly at the pipelines. So, you know, if I created a build for that and then went over to my release, so if I came into releases and have a look at here. So here's the QA the QA environment has a pending deployment. So somebody's waiting for an approval on this. And if we went in and looked at the QA environment, we can see the difference between the builds. So there are the commits, and here are the work items, and I'll just change it to an older one just so we see something. But you see, these are the work items that were checked in against the code that went into the difference between build 41.2 and 64.1. So all that integration is through there. So when you get this, you know, when you get to the point where you're going to execute a test plan, you pick the build that you're executing in that you just deployed to the QA environment, and because these stories are now in there, or these bugs are fixed, or whatever it is, and then your test runs will reflect that build number in them as well, so that we have complete auditability and traceability across what we're testing, and it just flows up very easily into this progress report for us. Any questions? That was a quick tour of test plans.
Thanks, Dave. I learned a lot today.
Good, I'm glad. Thank you very much. Appreciate the feedback.
Any more questions?
No, just some feedback. That was great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alex.
Yeah, thank you. So this is that concludes today's session. This is the last session for this season. We'll be back in September. If you have anything in mind that you want to hear or speak on in September, please let us know, and we'll be happy to accommodate. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Anything else before we call it a day?
No, that's awesome.
No?
Everybody have a
Kids'
great day.
bedtime now.
Yeah, I
Thanks,
can
you
do
too.
that. Have a good weekend. And
Thanks, you too, guys.
I'll talk to you in September. Again, if you have anything, if you have any questions, requests, you can always reach out via Meetup. We're happy to answer. It's just the next session will be in September. But we meet every second Thursday of the month. So it will be second Thursday of September, whatever that date is. If the COVID situation improves, it's going to be in person. Otherwise, it's going to go. Thank you again, and have a good weekend.
Thanks. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Cheers.
Because I think these, I don't know, it was, I lost it for a minute.